Welcome to another episode of Women Investing in Women. Robin and I are very excited to bring you another amazing woman who, in her own way, in her own sphere, making a huge impact by investing in women and lifting women up. And I would just want to take a moment and remind everybody why Robin and I do this. We live in a world where women generationally have been brought up and raised and subjected to a scarcity environment. And it's time for us to transcend that. It's time for us to transcend and embrace a sense of abundance, celebrate one another, lift each other up, and truly demonstrate how women are behind the scenes working to lift each other up and the power we bring to bear when we show up together. Take it away, Robin.
I am beyond thrilled to have Susan Madsen with us. And Susan is now has founded and is head of the Women Leadership Project in Utah. And she has a resume that is as long as your arm. And just a couple of things that she's done. She was the very first endowed professor of leadership in the John M. Huntsman School of Business at Utah State. Before that, she was a professor of leadership and ethics at Utah Valley University. She was a visiting fellow of faculty of economics and business at the University of Zagreb in Croatia. And she has spoken at the UN. She has spoken in multiple places around the world. We are so thrilled to have Susan Madsen with us. And so I want to kick us off in visiting with you, because this will be a very short time. Tell us about the project that you are involved in, what motivated you to found it, and what drives you in these countless activities you've done for women and leadership.
Well, thank you so much. I'll start with the last one, and that is what drives me. So I have felt very called. I happen to be a very religious and spiritual person, and what the choices I've made throughout my life, from marrying to bearing children to continuing through having children, getting a master's degree and a doctorate degree, and then the career path I've taken with a lot of flexibility for kids have all of those choices for me have come through a real connection with God. And so the work that I continue to do absolutely comes with that too. And I feel very called to do certain things. So I spend a lot of years feeling pulled and doing research and scholarship around the topic of women and leadership. And sometimes people, when they look at the work I'm doing today, say, does all the research you're doing today relate to leadership? Because we do reports today. I'll back up and tell you how, on domestic violence, on child sexual abuse, on entrepreneurship, on the wage gap, on women graduating with graduate degrees, on all of these topics that impact women. And so when people say, well, what do those have to do with leadership, which is your scholarly, my scholarly area, it's like everything that a woman experiences impacts her confidence, impacts her voice, impacts how she can engage with the world, impacts all kinds of things. So each of these things provides insight into this wholeness of who we are as women. And so I wanted to back up with that. So back with your question. So I have been over a couple decades, been doing lots of global work, lots of work in the state on women and various issues. About 14 years ago, I started publishing books, and some of my books came out specifically on women leaders in education and in government. And one of the key things was college. Like, they found their voices in college. So I started speaking in Utah a bunch, and that led me to people saying, you love girls and women. Can you help us in the state of Utah? And so I took on, at the request of the Commissioner of Higher Education in the state of Utah and the governor's office, a project to really dig deeply into why more women weren't going to college and graduating. And that was supposed to be a one-year project. Robin, great question. 1-year project. And then I'm like, oh, it's so big because we're doing stuff around the state. Let's do 2 years. And then I swear, through the years, probably 3 or 4 times, I was this close to closing the loop. I like to close loops and let me move on to something else. But continuous requests, and we are a hub of research now, have come in. And we call it the Utah Women in Leadership Project. And the mission is to strengthen the impact of Utah girls and women. I have the same mission for myself, for girls outside of Utah too, globally, and that's really important. But I'll tell you, our Utah resources are accessed by people around the world. And so we really do the research, a ton of research, and we also create resources, courses and handouts and events. And then, yeah, the last one is really trainings and events. We have podcasts and all kinds of things, because what I believe is that we need to do research to provide the foundation for everything else. But if we don't take the research and get it into the hands of policymakers, stay-at-home moms, businesses, men and women business leaders, business workers, are you following me? I mean, like nonprofits and everything, that it's not going to move the needle. And so my latest piece really, and I know this is a long answer, but trying to give you a lot of things in one. So in 2022, I was so restless that year. I'm a restless soul, can I just say it? And I'm a change agent. And I was, even though we've been doing so much work, the needle is not moving hardly at all in Utah and even nationally in many areas. And so I was wrestling that year and doing a lot of prayer and reflection and different things on, we've got to find a way to shift things faster. We have to, for our daughters. I have 3 sons, 1 daughter. For my daughter, who's 31, for my granddaughter, who's 4, and for my daughter has 2 babies in her belly, and 1 is a daughter. And if right now at the rate we're going with change, it's going to take us 2, 3, 4 decades to make any notable progress. And I say that's not good enough for my kids, for my grandkids, for my neighbors, for people living in Utah and beyond. And so this movement came to me really on airplanes. I read books, and I read this How Change Happens. I'm a change scholar. It came to me, I wrestled with it, and we have now launched it. It's called A Bolder Way Forward, and abolderwayforward.org is the website. And it's a way that we can come together in a systems thinking and a collective impact way to do things that nobody else in any other state has done. And that means we do the stuff collectively together to shift things. And so that, hopefully I hit the pieces of your question. That's a bit of what I do and what I'm passionate about. And it's all about strengthening women. And when we strengthen women and girls, we actually strengthen families, and we strengthen boys and men. So that's what I'm passionate about, and I'm sticking with it.
And that is so powerful and very moving, Susan. And thank you for sharing the details. What question comes up for me is you're talking about a bolder way forward, and you're talking about why lifting up women and girls is going to lift up families and lift up communities. And that has been a model for nonprofits all over the world, because when you lift up a woman, you really do lift up a family. When you lift up a man, you lift up a man, right? And that has always been the reality. And I am actually doing a lot of work in the Caribbean for women and girls and integrating boys in, because when women are empowered, they need empowered men alongside to be their supportive partners. And if we leave our boys behind, then there is an imbalance that is caused. So can you talk a little bit about how the organization and your movement is strengthening women to truly raise empowered sons and daughters? And also, how are we helping the boys to feel and be okay to feel and channel their emotions? Because when boys are told, boys don't cry, boys don't feel, we are truly creating a dam that is going to break.
Yeah, that's such a good question. What we know from the research, and we've done extensive research through the years on male allyship, and that's the term we use. And actually about 3 months ago, we did an event. I have it on my website, utwomen.org, but we did an event with some therapists, and it was on the teen girls and the CDC data on depression and suicide and so forth. That group had such an interesting conversation about, we have to put so much work into our daughters, but if we're not working with our sons, because there's a rise in sexual violence, it's not getting better. And so if we just work with one side and not help boys and girls, young men and young women, men and women, things are not going to change. And so in terms of our model for a bolder way forward, we actually have 5 big categories, but 18 focus areas that range from understanding finance, which is critical actually, to domestic violence. And those two are more empowered. If you're more empowered, that impacts domestic violence. But we have so many different things like entrepreneurship and helping organizations know strategies and so forth. But health across the lifespan is really important. That mental and physical health is just so critical. And in that area, there's going to be many different elements. And we also have a home and family one as well. And so when we're looking at equality in marriage, which is critical for violence, for all kinds of things to reduce violence, but that equality in marriage, that piece right there, or equality in partnerships, whatever it might look like, right? If kids see, our sons and daughters see this respectful relationship and more equality and voice used in their homes, that's going to be one thing, right? But empowering mothers to know more about the different parts of parenting, what the mental health challenges of their children, which are not going away, the impacts of social media, the impacts of video games for boys and violence. That's got to be a critical piece of the work that we're doing in Utah. As we know, I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Dr. Valerie Hudson, and she's done global work, and the United Nations uses that. But her last very thick research book that's super thick, it comes down to the security of nations. And it comes down to the relationship in the home is directly connected to everything else in terms of society and empowerment and violence. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, you have given us a huge amount of information. This is fabulous. You know, the thing I keep hearing over and over is voice, and women finding a voice. Having a voice, you have to have a voice if you're going to impact, the finances, if you're going to impact the child rearing, et cetera. And so what were some of the things that you find that are useful in terms of women being able to find their voice, and then be able to use their voice and use a voice that is calm and reasoned and powerful, as opposed to shrill and complaining and whining?
Yeah. And we all complain and whine a little bit, so we have to give ourselves some space there. But one thing is, the more that we are educated and become aware of ourself, of the surroundings of gender issues, the more, like when I teach, and I haven't taught it for a while because of my schedule, but when I teach courses on confidence, there's so much interesting stuff on neuroscience and the difference and socialization, how in the homes we're socializing, even me. And I know a lot about gender, our daughters and sons and granddaughters. I'm working super hard with my 4-year-old granddaughter, never to say, you're the cutest thing, and focus on her looks. Her mother does that enough. And I'm trying not to do that. But the more we know, the more we can be empowered, right? So being educated on things, understanding the brain differences in gender and those kinds of things, but understanding confidence and self-esteem and more. The more we know, the more we can be empowered to be thoughtful in our choices. The more we understand communication and how certain kinds of communication and conflict, like the silent treatment, like this and that, it's not helpful. Those things are not helpful. But if we've seen our mothers or our parents act like that, we don't know anything different. And so the more we know, the better we can do. Secondly, I say that the more people see women in leadership roles, even in the community, using their voices, the more girls, even young girls, the research around socialization is so powerful. Even at the age of 2, 3, 4, 5, these young girls and boys see often more men on TV leading, more, they just don't see the women in positions, and therefore their identity of using their voice and being a leader is already being developed. And they see more female teachers. So they see women in certain settings and not in others. But I will tell you, we have one of our spoke areas is political representation, but also boards and commissions, more women. And then the third is so key, and that is civil engagement and advocacy. That's going to be so important. I have been partnering with many groups, including the Utah State Board of Education and the Utah PTA. And what the PTA has been telling me is that so many women do not even like the word advocate or advocacy because they believe that they're not. Yet every mother who takes her child to the doctor, every mother that goes and tries to, get their kid on a certain, with a good teacher or with whatever, that's advocacy. That every mother, and I would say every woman, whether she, is a mother or not, and sometimes I use the word mothering, we mother kids that are not ours all the time by our actions. But we need to increase the aspirations, because women as well and girls don't feel like, especially in our state, that they're supposed to use their voice and lead. And I say hogwash to that. We are supposed to lead that. And in my religious and spiritual upbringing, I say God needs women more today than he has ever before. And so learning about how their voice can matter in the community, using that, believing that it's their role to lead alongside, not behind, but alongside is something that we have a lot of work to do, because it is what our communities need. It's what our homes need. It's what our congregations need. It's what our state needs. And Dr. Cass, you had said something about, let me just read the quote that I use often by Melinda Gates. If you want to lift up humanity, empower women. It is the most comprehensive, pervasive, high leverage investment you can make in human beings. Women get things done, and we do things differently.
Absolutely. I'm sitting here smiling, and I loved the way how you integrated spirituality with the purpose and the impact women can create. We have an international audience, we have an international following, and we cover women from all over the world. And I am a girl who grew up in Sri Lanka and India. So I come from another part of the world, another culture. And I grew up in a society where we worshiped goddesses.
Yes.
So God is a she.
Oh.
And so we didn't grow up being told we're a princess. We grew up being told we're a goddess. And it truly changes the mindset, right? Because you know you can impact life, you know you can make a difference. And the voices we are raised around doesn't make us feel like we're less than. And I was fortunate enough to come from the country that gave the first woman head of state in 1960.
Mm.
So I am fortunate, but now I get to bring that into the Western world, including the Caribbean. My question is, as women are being empowered and being helped to rise up and take their seat in life and at the table, how do we help them not make their femininity less than and elevate the masculinity?
Yeah.
Because the power of having men and women side by side is to amplify the femininity that is nurturing, that is compassionate, that holds grace, and that has advocacy built into it. And we want men to embrace some of those qualities. They already have it in them, but it is not the traditional masculinity. How do we make the femininity rise up and make it contagious so that instead of women making their femininity disappear and showing up in masculinity, help the men show up with their femininity?
I love that. Thank you so much. I want to start though with a comment related to one of your messages. And the research tells us 30 to 40% women more than men need to feel that calling and purpose to lean in and use their voice in a way that we would term lead, which comes, some mothers say, I've never led. I'm like, don't you have 4 teenagers in your home? Is that not the hardest leadership of all? But I think that's really important, because when we train women and do leadership programs, the research has supported that we have that conversation about calling and purpose, because if women don't see that, they're less likely to lean in and step forward. So I encourage, whether you're religious, whether you're not, we can still feel called if we're not religious. We just feel like we're made to do certain things, but have those conversations with your daughters, with who, if you're a teacher, with the people around, with colleagues in the workplace, because women, when we feel that connection, we're going to say, wait, I'm needed. My voice is needed. So I wanted to say that before. There's some great research on the feminine masculinity, and there's a book. It's probably 6-7 years old now. It's called the Athena Doctrine, and it was actually a study by 2 men, but they did this study in so many countries, and they had 64,000 respondents, and it was around this exact topic of feminine masculine in, I think it was 38 countries around the world. And what they found at that time, and it's moving even more, is that actually things were starting to shift. And men and women were identifying those qualities, like collaborative, like that are typically feminine qualities, and more masculine qualities, or assertiveness and being direct and results oriented and getting the job done. But significantly more than ever before in the generations, people were saying good leadership looks more feminine. Is that making sense? So those, and we've seen that shift, that the more direct, directive, masculine, great man theory is what we call it, is kind of moving out the door. And the leadership, you see that more though in political leadership, right? And so that's where it shows up, and in more. But businesses, especially in the States and the Western countries, but I think it's shifting in others. Asia, some of the Asian countries are a little bit behind that. They're more directive still. But those things are becoming how people lead, and what our young men and young women who are coming into the workforce, and even at the millennials, they're expecting that. they're not wanting to be told everything. They're expecting that. So it used to be that women had to put on black suits. I have some good black suits, and look more masculine. But the latest research is saying that that's not productive. That women and there are organizations, STEM is one of those organizations, tech, that really are behind other organizations in welcoming those kinds of styles. But generally speaking, the more we have women really using what comes naturally, and that tends to be being collaborative and teamwork. But I will say, some people like me, I was raised with 6 brothers. I can be collaborative, but I can be very directive and bossy. I was second to the oldest. But there's certain situations where we just have to do it. We have to move. There's crisis. And so that combination, and some of us do a little more masculine and then bring back, but what's authentic to us? So I can get away with that and people still, oh, that's Susan. But if we're forcing ourselves to be one way or the other, sometimes that's challenging. I use the word authentic, but we have to be careful with that word, because some people say, well, it's me, so I don't need to learn and grow. This is just how I show up. This is how I deal with conflict. And we're like, actually, there's another authentic way once you learn how to deal with conflict a little bit better.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, you have already given us so much to think about and chew on and take action on. With every interview that we do, the time flies by. And so can you give us, in closing, you've already given us a million golden nuggets, but can you give us one golden nugget as we wrap up our very brief podcast here?
I think the golden nugget I would say is that the more we're open to learning and growth, and the more that we can really make a better impact for our own kids and for people around whatever work we do. And that means growth and learning is about change. It's about change. So we often, as women especially, but men too, we resist that change. We don't want to we like to stay in our comfort zone. That's what it is. More than men, women like to stay in our comfort zone because we're socialized to do that, right? But it is where we're outside our comfort zone that true learning, growth, change, impact, influence, and leadership can occur. So I guess my golden nugget would be, in summary, get out of our comfort zones more often, learn and grow more about gender, even learn more about gender and the differences, not to have one lifted or the other not lifted, but to embrace and understand so that we can better work together as men and women. All genders need to be working together, and always keep in mind other differences as well, race and ethnicity. The more that we understand that, the more we can actually do better. Gender blind, race blind, old stuff doesn't work. So that's my nugget for you, or a few. I snuck in a few different nuggets there.
Thank you so much, Dr. Susan Madsen. It's been such a pleasure, honor, and a joy to have this conversation with you. And as we wrap this conversation up, we call upon our audience and your communities to keep the golden nugget shared by Susan today. Make sure that you get out of your comfort zone, stretch a little, and in that process of stretching, emerge the butterfly you're supposed to become. And in that process of metamorphosis, be comfortable embracing your yin and your yang, the masculinity and femininity that is already inside of you, because you were each created uniquely, but with a balance. And with that balance, you can make an impact and live a life that is going to be meaningful.